Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And it's good to see you all here today. Well, last week we started talking about the Heart Sutra, or the Heart of Great Perfect Wisdom Sutra, as the full title is sometimes translated. And it was mentioned that this is what you might call an advanced teaching in Buddhism. So one reason for the difficulty is that I think the sutra addresses something that is beyond our usual way of looking at things, beyond our usual cognition, beyond words, which it refers to as prajna paramita, or beyond wisdom, wisdom beyond wisdom, or great wisdom. And last week we talked about the title. Um, Actually, the sutra is quite short. It has, when it's translated in the usual way, is comprised by 6 sentences. And the first sentence is perhaps the most difficult to talk about because it compacts so many notions, so many concepts into one sentence. But we'll start talking about the first sentence today. And in the translation that we are reading, it goes like this. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, when deeply practicing prajna paramita, clearly saw that all 5 aggregates are empty and thus relieved all suffering. Avalokiteshvara, when deeply practicing prajna paramita, clearly saw that all 5 aggregates are empty and thus relieved all suffering. So there are sort of a string of concepts there. One of them, or notions, or entities, or issues to discuss. One is Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva. And then there's the notion of practicing. The Bodhisattva is practicing what? Practicing prajna paramita. And perceiving or seeing that the 5 aggregates, another concept, are empty, a further concept. And then in seeing this, relieved all suffering. So there's a lot to unpack here. And again, an additional disclaimer is that I am sharing some perspectives, some thoughts about this that are not the same as the perspectives I may have had a few years ago, when it's been quite some time since I discussed this. And I'm sure will not be the same as those I have in the future. And they are certainly not the same as those of others. There are literally hundreds of commentaries on the Heart Sutra out there available in various forms. So my intention here is not to explain the Heart Sutra, but more or less to invite you into the Heart Sutra by sharing some of these perspectives. And one thought about the Heart Sutra that I find helpful is that there is some confusion, I think, in Buddhist literature as to what the Buddha is actually doing. Is the Buddha actually kind of telling us the way things are? Is the Buddha giving us an ultimate description of reality? Or is the Buddha more interested in what we would call soteriology? Soteriology, saving, salvation, saving us from what? Saving us from suffering. And I think the Buddha was very clear about this. It's not hidden. And many times he said in one way or another, and I'll quote one of the suttas from the early Buddhist teachings, formerly and now, it is only stress I describe and the cessation of stress. So the Buddha is interested in the human experience, and in particular, the problem of suffering. What causes suffering? What relieves suffering? So that is the sense in which I'm using the word salvation here. Saving us, relieving us from suffering. All beings from suffering. So when we look at it that way, I think it changes the perspective. Because sometimes there's language that, in meditation, for instance, you're trying to see things as they are, or see the true self, talk about absolutes, truth, reality. And there's an abundance of literature now about drawing parallels between the Buddha's teachings and quantum mechanics, quantum physics, neuroscience, as if the Buddha was really talking about physics or chemistry or cosmology, the way the planets move and interact with one another, all of this, the origin and the fate of the universe. But the Buddha really had a much more focused intent, which was to deal with the problem of human suffering. And in particular, how our perceptions of reality can lead to suffering or can relieve suffering. So, Avalokiteshvara, who is Avalokiteshvara? Well, we've talked about this before. But I will, if I can, share the screen, try to find these things. There we go. These features kind of move around on Zoom. You have to keep up with it. But this is an image from a statue that is actually carved in wood and painted and gilded. It's in the St. Louis Art Museum, and some of you may have seen it. It's part of their permanent uh, exhibit. It's from China, and it's estimated to be about 1,000 years old. And it's an image of Avalokiteshvara. There are many images of Avalokiteshvara. Some of them look more male because originally in India, Avalokiteshvara was considered to be of male gender. And then in China, somehow Avalokiteshvara became more feminine, more of female gender. And sometimes the images are androgynous. And this is another image of Avalokiteshvara, which shows some characteristics that she has. And this is it's housed in Taiwan. It's at a temple there. And it shows her with many, many arms. It is said 1,000 arms. And um, the hands are in various positions. And sometimes there are eyes in the palm of each hand so that Avalokiteshvara can see what is needed and address the need, potentially doing many things at the same time or addressing what is needed at that moment using various skills or taking various roles. And Avalokiteshvara is said to have 33 different forms. So she is a shapeshifter. And she takes the form that is appropriate for the need. So, well, Avalokiteshvara is clearly a mythical figure. There isn't someone out there with 1,000 arms. But she's described as a bodhisattva, someone who is interested in coming to an understanding of his or her place in the world that will allow her to be of benefit to herself and others, and in particular will allow her to relieve the suffering of herself and others. And one might ask, well, what use is having this mythical figure? The mythical figures in general speak about what is inside us. So in a sense, we are invited to see the Avalokiteshvara in ourselves, which is manifest frequently. You'll notice it during the day, as you go through the day, as you open a door for somebody or do some other thing. You can see evidence of Avalokiteshvara in disaster areas after hurricanes, people chipping in, doing what they can to help. Avalokiteshvara manifests in us. So in this sutra, Avalokiteshvara is practicing deeply prajna paramita. So the use of the word practicing, sometimes it's translated as coursing through or moving through. It has that quality of movement about it, and a dynamic quality, not just sitting there, but actually moving through, practicing prajna paramita. Prajna paramita, as we discussed, is translated as great wisdom or wisdom beyond wisdom, wisdom beyond words. Sometimes it's framed as being intuitive wisdom. beyond the rules, beyond even the precepts, wisdom. But in this case, Avalokiteshvara is not just someone who has wisdom, but someone who is coursing through wisdom. So the wisdom then is not something stationary, not something to obtain, but something to live, something to move through, coursing through. So the wisdom is a way of life and not just a something that can be put into a document. So Avalokiteshvara then is practicing prajna paramita, wisdom beyond wisdom, and clearly saw that all five aggregates are empty. The aggregates, again, as a reminder, what are those? First of all, aggregates is a translation of the Pali word skanda, and skanda is sometimes translated as heaps. Sometimes it's more creatively translated as rivers or streams, because there is, again, a dynamic quality to it. And the five aggregates, or the five streams, are the Buddha's way of expressing the components, what we use in order to constitute a self, in order to make a personality. And it's not the usual way we think about things in the West, but it's, I think, a valid way of looking at things. So the five aggregates, the five streams referred to are form, feeling, perception, fabrication, and consciousness. So form is just material form, materiality, substance, what we usually think of as matter, form. There are different ways of looking at that, but that's the general idea. And in particular, when we're thinking about the self, the form refers to the body, the physical body. And the rest of these aggregates are more or less mental, or at least non-material. The second one being feeling. And feeling in early Buddhist literature is described as being pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Basically, it has three settings. We experience something, and it's either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Perception is isolation to perceiving an object in one manner or another through the senses, typically visual, and isolating it from its surroundings. So we look across the room and we see a cushion, and we identify that as being separate from everything that surrounds it, and we might even label it with a name, cushion. Perception. It's the act, in a way, of isolating, separating our environment into parts. And then the next one, fabrications or formations or impulses. It's translated various ways, but it refers to our sort of innate tendency to bring to these perceptions stories. So that when I see a cushion, there are a number of memories that come, and it may arouse impulses. It may, oh, there's somebody coming to the door, so you may hear a doorbell momentarily. Just ignore it, please. It's an irritating doorbell. I'm sorry. We bring to these perceptions certain stories about other experiences we've had with them, and these are highly flavored by causes and conditions. So we bring to them narratives, and these can give rise to impulses. I might think the cushion is in the wrong place and needs to be moved, and I get up and go ahead and take care of it. Oh, thank goodness he didn't ring the doorbell. So, and the last aggregate is consciousness, just awareness of all this going on. Awareness of all the above. Form, feeling, perceptions, formations, fabrications, whatever. All of that. And these can be described as sort of the ingredients that we use in order to create a self. But Avalokiteshvara perceives that these are empty. Sunyatta is the word that is translated into empty. And almost any commentary will include an apology for the translation. Oh, it's misleading. It's sometimes translated as voidness or boundlessness, sometimes even considered fullness or interdependent. So Sunyatta is hard to translate, but it's most often translated as being empty. And what do we mean by empty? Well, the Buddha actually addressed this again in some of his very earliest teachings. So I'll read a section from a sutta in the Pali Canon, where he refers to the aggregates. And he refers to them one right after another, but I'll read the section that relates to form, and the others are similar. What do you think? Is form constant or inconstant? He asks one of his followers. Inconstant, Lord. And is that which is inconstant easeful or stressful? Oh, it's stressful, Lord. And is it fitting to regard what is inconstant, stressful, subject to change as this is mine, this is myself, this is what I am? Oh, no, Lord. Thus, monks, any form whatsoever that is past, future, or present, internal or external, blatant or subtle, common or sublime, far or near, every form is to be seen with right discernment as it has come to be. This is not mine. This is not myself. This is not what I am. Seeing thus the instructed disciple of the Noble One grows disenchanted with form, disenchanted with feeling, disenchanted with perception, disenchanted with fabrications, disenchanted with consciousness. So not me, not mine, not what I am. This body, not me, not mine, not what I am. Certainly isn't a possession in the usual sense of the word. We didn't buy it. We don't have much control over how it ages, how it gets sick, how it gets injured, how it heals. It can be looked at more meaningfully, I think, as a gift rather than a possession. And same with the other aggregates, feeling, perceptions, formations, consciousness. They come and go. They're like streams that move together and join into a river that we interpret as a person, a personality. But it's a dynamic process. So these five aggregates are empty. Empty of what? Empty of own being. Svabha is the Pali word. Own being. In a way, this teaching is a way of giving us a little distance from our bodies, our feelings, our perceptions, our formations, and our consciousness, understanding that they're subject to causes and conditions, that they're constantly changing. The Buddha, when asked, is there a self or is there not a self? Responded with silence. Responded with silence, and that was, as he explained, because if he said there is a self, that would lead you off in the wrong direction. And if he said there was not a self, that would lead you off in the other wrong direction. So what self is remains a mystery. And what Avalokiteshvara is inviting us to do is to be aware of that and to use whatever self is for the purposes of prajna paramita, for wisdom. Now, I didn't mention that Avalokiteshvara is associated with compassion. She is the bodhisattva of compassion, in China called Guanyin, and in Japan called Kanseon or Kanon. So why is the bodhisattva of compassion giving us a lecture on wisdom? Because ultimately, as we'll see, wisdom, true wisdom, is said to imply compassion. And true compassion depends on wisdom. They imply each other, and in a sense, are the same. Different perspectives of the same thing. So we didn't get to relieved all suffering, so I'll leave that as a question for the breakout rooms. How does all this, or does it, relieve suffering? Or more basically, what is the relief of suffering? What is it? If the Buddha is trying to lead us in that direction, what is it about that we want? What is it about that we should follow? We'll stop there and go to the breakout rooms. I know this is kind of dense and wordy, but I appreciate your attention today and see you back in a few minutes.